What's up, everybody? Welcome to Show Me the Meaning, Wisecrack's movie podcast.
Show me the meaning of being sick.
My name is Jared, and I'm joined here by the Show Me the Meaning crew. We got Austin.
Yo, what up, everybody?
And we got Helen.
Hey, everybody.
So today we're breaking down a movie that is quite prescient for the situation that we find ourselves in. Today we're talking about Contagion, the 2011 movie directed by Steven Soderbergh, starring Gwyneth Paltrow, Kate Winslet, Matt Damon, Jude Law, and Lawrence Fishburne, and Marion Cotillard. This movie has a crazy cast. As always, we're going to go around and see what it was like the first time you saw this movie, what it was like revisiting it, and, let's also throw in there, what is your life like right now in this current crisis that we're in? Let's start with Helen, since Helen, it was your idea to do this movie, and also tell us why you wanted to do this movie.
Yeah, first my first reaction. So the first time that I saw this movie was probably about 6 or 7 weeks ago. I didn't see it back in 2011, which was kind of surprising because there's not very many good medical disaster films, in my opinion, but I do like, I like them. I kind of feel like my junk food. So back about, what did I say, 6-8 weeks ago, it was like, would be kind of crazy if this would happen. They probably did a pretty good job depicting this and, read about how it was pretty scientifically accurate and that kind of thing. Then I rewatched it last night. And it was like, holy crap, this is actually happening right now. Maybe not the entirety of obviously the plot, but of course, just kind of the situation that the characters find themselves in, being in lockdown, which is exactly what I will be at midnight here in San Francisco. So, yeah. And I wanted to do this movie because I'm just kind of fascinated by viruses and by, kind of their implications on society. And I had read a lot about this film and how it was, from a scientific standpoint, pretty well done, and from a public health standpoint, pretty well done. And now being in the midst of this whole crisis, it seems that was indeed correct. So, yeah.
So what do you mean by at midnight you're on lockdown? Is San Francisco doing a complete lockdown starting at midnight?
Yeah, dude. So basically, the specific instruction is like, don't go out. Let's see, 1 second. I'm turning my gain here. So it seems, what are they saying? Don't go out unless you absolutely have to. They're like pretty much all non-essential businesses are closed. Which is really kind of a nightmare for people who are working, obviously, like in the restaurant industry and that kind of thing. It's like, a lot of my friends are freelancers and creatives, is same for you guys, I'm sure. And it's just, so, it was kind of like this was coming, and now here we are. So we're supposed to be sheltered until further notice.
So if the virus wasn't happening, would you be back in LA right now?
Yes, I would.
Okay.
I was going to go this weekend, and I ultimately decided not to because I just felt bad traveling. Just didn't want to risk it. Didn't want to risk it for other people. So, yep.
Yeah.
Here we are.
Austin, what about you?
So this is the first time that I had actually seen this movie, and I'm not going to lie. When we first said Contagion, I got it confused with the movie Outbreak. Which was the movie from the 90s. There's a Dustin Hoffman, and I think it's Renee Russo. Is she in it too?
I haven't seen that.
I can't remember. It's about a monkey virus.
Yeah.
Did you see that one, Helen?
I know of it. Yeah. I saw it a long time ago, but I wanted to rewatch it for this, but
Yeah.
So
I totally got confused when we said we were doing Contagion. I was like, yeah, I love that movie. I was like, I saw that when I was a kid. And for whatever reason, I just thought that it was called Contagion because it was about like a contagious virus or whatever. So this was the first time I'd actually ever seen the film, which is strange because I'm not like a huge Soderbergh fan, but I like Soderbergh's films quite a bit. So I'm surprised that this was the first time that I had actually sat down and watched the film. I love the first act. The way that they, by the way, spoilers all the time, right, for everybody. But like the way that they show how much we are in constant contact with each other and how much just the touching of a door, the touching of a subway handle, the touching of a glass, grazing somebody's fingers, and then how that they wipe on their outfit and then they touch their face. And I heard someone saying something the other day, or maybe it was in the film. Yeah, I saw something the other day. I've been watching so much shit that it's all kind of like blurring together now. But how we touch our face like a couple thousand times a day on average. I was like, holy shit. And then I've been checking myself. I'm like, do I? I guess I do touch my face a few times a minute, and I'm like, that adds up throughout the waking hours of my sleep, let alone who knows what I'm doing, or when I'm awake. I mean, who knows what I'm doing when I'm sleeping, if I'm rubbing my eyes and shit like that. We have those receptors in our eyes that I'm like, Jesus. So I love that aspect of the film because it freaked me the fuck out, and it just kind of made me realize how easy it is for transmission of these types of viruses, right? And then from a filmic perspective, I didn't love the second and third act. I thought it was just a little bit, there were too many characters. They were trying to do too much, and I didn't care enough about the individual stories. I really would have rather hunkered down in just one or two of the stories. So like the doctor, for example, played by Marianne Cotillard, who's gets kidnapped by the Chinese people to go to that village. God, I felt like there was some really interesting territory to explore there, because clearly she leaves at the end when she gets her vaccination, but she finds out it's a placebo. And she's like, well, fuck this shit. And I think the indication is she's going to go back to go help with the kids in the village because she felt like she's had some sort of attachment with them. And I would have rather spent some more time like with that kind of thing. But what I did, I guess, appreciate, even though I don't think it was fully successful, is that you got to see as wide of the impact as possible in an hour and a half or hour and 40-minute film, which was handled well, but I just don't think it was, So like 7 out of 10. Maybe 7.5 out of 10, I guess is what I get. I liked the film. I loved parts of it, and I appreciated the ambition. And of course, the scientific accuracy and things like that was crazy. It felt very prescient. I felt like, holy shit, like we could have just watched this film and then understood like where things would have been and what's going on behind the scenes with the CDC and shit like that. But from a filmic perspective, cinematic perspective, not love, even though I do love parts of it. That's what I'll say. Oh, and where am I right now? I'm sick in Sydney with flu-like symptoms in isolation, and I have been for the last 4 days or 5 days. And I was told not to come into the hospital or the doctors to get tested because I'm healthy and it's only mildly affecting me right now. Do I have it? We don't know because I don't have like a test or anything at home, but I have the symptoms, even though it's not affecting me horribly. But I slept for 3 days, and I've just been drinking water and isolating myself, and I feel okay.
Well, so thank you for making it for the podcast, but you don't seem to have a cough.
I actually, Helen, before we started recording, I did have a cough, and she's like, "Oh, you are sick." When I woke up before we started recording, I coughed my freaking brains out to try to get all the phlegm out. It's been a wet cough. I haven't had a dry cough, so I woke up with just a shitload of phlegm and shit like that. But no, I do. I've just been sitting here secretly in the microphone doing one of these like quiet.
Wow, that's
things.
very.
But
well, I mean, if ever coughing was appropriate,
to try to mask it.
If ever coughing was appropriate, it's for this movie, because the first thing we even hear, it's just coughing on black is the first thing that we witness in this film.
Very ominous, right?
Yeah. I also saw this film for the first time recently. I was aware of it because this movie initially came out when there was a scare about the avian bird flu, right?
Yeah, that would have been it, around 2011.
Or something?
Or was it SARS? No, it was bird flu. I'm trying to remember.
Yeah. So I think at the time I was like, oh man, I just don't need to be scared about something like that. So I decided not to see it. But I saw it. I watched it with my dad, who he just turned to me and said, make sure your mother never sees this because she's going to freak out. But I mostly agree with Austin. I like the movie. I probably would give it like a 6 or 7 out of 10. I really like some of the ways that the camera follows the interactions and the things that are touched, and how the camera lingers past the point you would normally linger in a scene, just so that it makes you focus on the thing that has been interacted with, and makes it that's like the big bad of the movie is the pathogen, so to say. And so the cast is great. I think Lawrence Fishburne is actually quite good in this movie, and which is great because I feel like he's usually just playing Morpheus and is kind of, I don't know, I've been pretty critical of him in his post-Morpheus career because he seems to be phoning it in a lot, but I think he's actually quite good in this one. So, yeah, I mean, I really don't have a ton to say about the movie other than it was effectively scary. But I will say that I'll get to this after the recap. I'm a little bit surprised that it's getting all this love for scientific accuracy, and I'm not a scientist. I don't know much about science. But there were some things that were egregiously wrong in the movie that I want to get your guys' thoughts on, but we're going to wait until after the recap for that. So let's go into the recap. After a business trip to Hong Kong, Beth Emhoff and her young son unexpectedly die of a mysterious virus, leaving her husband Mitch and his daughter Jory alone in Minneapolis, where Mitch becomes paranoid about anyone coming into contact with Jory, especially a young gentleman caller named Andrew. At the CDC, Dr. Ellis Cheever sends Dr. Aaron Mears to Minneapolis to investigate, while viral blogger Alan Kroomweed, I might be getting that wrong, shops around a video of someone dying of the virus to the local papers, but instead decides to spread it to his own audience. Back at the CDC, Dr. Ali Hextall determines that the virus comes from a mix of pig and bat. Within days, tens of thousands of people have been infected, and by the time a San Francisco doctor is able to grow the virus for testing, it's up to 8 million, including Dr. Mears, who dies soon after. In Hong Kong, epidemiologist Dr. Leona... Nope. Taking that again. In Hong Kong, epidemiologist Dr. Leonora Orantes traces the original case back to Beth, after which she is kidnapped and held ransom in Hong Kong. I'm taking this again. After which she is kidnapped and held ransom at a Hong Kong village in exchange for early treatment to vaccine when it's created. Alan, claiming to be sick, broadcasts himself taking a medication called Forsythia, which supposedly cures him. Soon society has turned to looting and plundering homes, pharmacies, grocery stores, and liquor stores. Eventually, Dr. Hextall decides to circumvent lengthy trials and tests her vaccine on herself. It works, but it will still take mankind a long time to produce enough vaccines for everyone, and thus have to administer via a lottery. Alan is arrested for profiteering off the false efficacy of Forsythia, and Dr. Orantes is released after an exchange of vaccines. But once she's informed they're placebos, she rushes back to be with the villagers. Dr. Cheever gives a vaccine to a janitor's son, and after being vaccinated, Mitch puts on an impromptu prom for Jory and Andrew. In the end, 26 million people die, and we see the genesis of the disease: a fruit bat dropping some of its food in a pig pen, a pig eating it, and a butcher coming in contact with the pig, then taking a photo with Beth without washing his hands. End of movie. All right, guys.
Wash your damn hands.
Wash your hands multiple times a day, people. Social distancing, please. All right, before we go any further, I want to give a shout out to our sponsors over at Skillshare. So one of the values that we hold really dear here at Wisecrack is being a lifelong learner, and Skillshare shares that mission statement, so we're really happy to have them sponsoring us. If you're looking to explore new skills or get inspired or deepen your existing passions, Skillshare is an online learning community where you can explore and discover thousands of classes on a wide variety of topics like graphic design, productivity, creative writing, film and video, freelancing, and more. So if you're looking for a class to take, I recommend checking out iPhone Filmmaking, creating cinematic video on your phone. So if you listen to our last podcast on The Lighthouse, I gave a shout out to the movie Tangerine, made back in 2015, because not only is this movie awesome, but it was shot entirely on an iPhone. So it's proof that if you have an iPhone, you can make a movie. Teachers Caleb and Niles will teach you all the nuances to make your iPhone videos good enough for the silver screen. They detail the equipment, apps, and workflow that is helpful for beginners and experienced cinematographers curious about shooting on an iPhone. And when you compare it to expensive in-person workshops or night classes, Skillshare is pretty affordable. An annual subscription is less than $10 a month. And right now they're offering Show Me the Meaning listeners 2 free months. All you got to do is go to Skillshare.com/wisecrack. Again, that's Skillshare.com/wisecrack for 2 free months of unlimited access to awesome classes. And now, back to the show. Okay. Oh, no, you can do that right into the microphone, man. Just let it rip.
That was perfectly timed. I was trying to do like the film did, how there was coughing beforehand, so...
Okay. So the thing I wanted to bring up that I find strangely inaccurate is, did anybody notice that some of the population numbers that they cite are crazy wrong?
Yeah, I did notice that. Actually, last night, the one for San Francisco, it's like, what was like 3 million, 4 million or something? And I'm like, wait a second. That's not Are they talking about the whole Bay Area? Even then, is that right?
I don't have that.
And so then you just lose your trust in them entirely.
Well, I don't have that one written down, but they say that the Tokyo population is 36.6 million. That's nuts. It's closer to 9 million. And so
right.
I don't know. And then but a couple of them are accurate. They say that the London population is 8.6 million. That's roughly accurate. They say that the Guangdong province in China is 96.1 million. That one's relatively accurate. That one's actually low. It's actually closer to 113 million. They say in Hong Kong there's 7.1 million. That's also mostly accurate. But Chicago, Tokyo, Minneapolis, all of them are wrong by multiples. And it's weird that you read about this movie and you read about its new relevance, obviously, in the time of the coronavirus. But the one thing that you always hear is that the mission of the movie was to make a movie that would dramatize what it would be like if this actually happened. And yet it seems like they're trying to exacerbate and exaggerate it like a horror movie by making these population sizes that much denser. So I wanted to get your guys' thoughts on why do you think they did this?
Yeah, I didn't know the numbers were so skewed first. So I guess I just kind of accepted it. I mean, clearly, I think the reason would be to just, like you say, kind of exaggerate the effects to show like what happens when you have a densely populated group of people, how this is basically something out of our control, right? Because that's what I got. I got a real sense especially the first act, that this is out of your control, right? Which I think is an appropriate understanding of how viruses spread. There was some douchebag, I don't know if you saw him online. He had to be trolling, but I don't think so because I read the rest of his account and the guy's crazy. But he's like, he took a selfie of himself. He's like this big ripped kickboxer dude, and he's like, I hit the genetic lottery. He's like, coronavirus, come and get me. I was like,
my God.
I know. I was like, you don't understand how this shit works. Like, it doesn't matter how big you are. This tiny little microscopic set of germs, like if you're healthy, that's one thing. It might not affect you as much, but it might. Like, I've heard stories about people in their 30s who are under the age of 40 who are now on ventilators or who are now in comas and things like that from this current coronavirus, right? And so, like, it made me feel out of control because these things are microscopic, they're small, they travel through the very basic functions of our breathing, of touching, of human society, of human interaction, which basically means that human society itself is a perfect breeding ground for this type of spread. So maybe when they're trying to dramatize this, they're trying to intentionally like make the problem seem more intense or make the spread seem more likely and out of control, if that makes sense. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it has to be something like that.
Right. Raising the stakes a little bit. I mean, when is this film set? That's something I didn't really think. I just assumed it was present day. I don't that's got to be the case. I mean, otherwise they didn't offer any explanation. So
yeah, I don't think they give a year, but it does seem like maybe it's this dystopic version of Earth where it's really overpopulated. Yeah, I wonder because the screenwriter is getting a lot of press right now. He's getting a lot of interviews with the Los Angeles Times and with Vulture magazine and all this stuff. And there's all these articles that are new about Contagion, but nobody has asked him about this that I've seen yet.
Yeah, right. No, I haven't seen it.
But more to Austin's point, I want to talk about some of the shots. This movie, some of the shots make it a germaphobe's nightmare. It's like a horror movie with germs. There's the close-ups of people putting their hands on the public transpo rails. I love when the camera moves, and the only reason that it moves is to show the path of the pathogen. So there's one point where the camera tilts down at a bowl of peanuts that Gwyneth Paltrow is eating right before it cuts away. And, normally we would just cut away without that tilt. But there's also a nice shot when Matt Damon is picking up his stepson from work. And as they're exiting the building, it's weird that the shot is from the perspective, it's roughly at the level of the little kid. And as they exit the building, the camera lingers on the door after they exit. Usually in movies, you never see people actually exiting a room or exiting a door, and you certainly don't linger on the shot long enough to see the door come back and swing back. But there's a really nice part where the camera continues to linger and you see the door slide back and you see the handle, the push handle where the kid had just touched the door. And it's all those just small moments like that that make you really paranoid right now here in March 2020 about the kind of things that you come in contact with. And I feel like if the movie is so effective now, then it certainly has done its job.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the sequence with, where Dr. Sussman, it's a obvious one, and it wasn't, it's not subtle by any means, but it's watching, as people like sipping and touching and just the whole, and you can feel it, and his realization that something has to be done because we are not going to keep our hands to ourselves. We're not going to keep our hands off of things.
Right.
And that was well done, I think, too.
It is clever that I like how you describe it. It's a horror film with germs. It is a horror film. I got that same sense, and I was thinking about that. It is kind of clever that the things that are the most frightening and the most monstrous in this particular film, at least, are the things we can't see.
Yeah,
right?
completely
and
invisible.
It has social repercussions that causes social strife, which is something to fear and be scared of. Like, the thing that's most frightening is the disease, because it had a fucking 25% death rate or something ridiculous like that. So yeah, that's the thing that's most terrifying. And how do you stop that? There's no cure for it. It's out of control. It spreads without us seeing. The only way to do it is to just not go outside. That's seems inhuman. So you have to become non-human so that you can stop the spread of this thing that is haunting us. It's almost like a ghost, but worse because it's scientific and material. Like ghost films scare the shit out of me because I'm like, I can't fight a fucking ghost. Like, I can fight a monster and I might lose, but at least I have a fighting chance. You can't fight a ghost and you can't fight a germ except with the right tools. And if you don't have the tools to fight the fucking germs, and that's like just fighting a ghost. And unless you're the Ghostbusters, you just can't do it. And so it scared the shit out of me. Yeah.
I will say there is one other thing that you can see that is kind of a viral enemy in this movie, and there's a line that it's the mass hysteria, and there's this, and with Jude Law's character, there's that whole thing with his persona, his Alex Jones-like persona, also going viral, and him spreading this misinformation about Forsythia. And there's a great line that Lawrence Fishburne's character says that kind of ties together the idea of the virality of the virus to the virality of misinformation and panic. He says, what we do know is that in order to become sick, you first need to come in contact with a sick person or something they touched. In order to get scared, all you need to do is come in contact with a rumor or the television or the internet. What Mr. Crumweed is doing, I'm probably getting that name so wrong, is spreading, what Mr. Crumweed is spreading is far more dangerous than the disease. And I think this is something that we can all identify with right now really, it's hard to even say what's a rumor or how painful or how harmful, the television or the internet is being in getting people a little bit scared, because it's just so hard to tell what's real. At what point, when none of us knows how long this quarantine is going to go on for. And so it's really hard to tell when, and I think that's the scariest part about it, is that you don't know when you're being unnecessarily scared.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was going to ask Helen about this in terms of the scientific stuff, because Jared, you said that there was some scientific quibbles that you had.
Oh no, my only one was the population thing. I know nothing about science.
Okay, so one of the things that comes from the uncertainty is that we as the average population, not the people in the CDC, not the people in the medical profession, I can talk to my friends who are doctors and I can ask them, but even they are we don't know. Like I was saying earlier with my symptoms, I was told not to go out. I was told because I have mild symptoms. Yeah, I've got a cough, but it's a wet cough. I'm in my 30s. I'm healthy. I'm fit. Even though I did just have lung surgery 6 months ago. But I know, but in terms of my respiratory health, it's 100%. I have no issues, no COPD. I'm not a smoker, anything like that. I'm not obese. I don't have high blood pressure. So for me, it was kind of hey, dude, just stay home, isolate yourself. Just try not to get anybody infected. Blah blah blah. You don't know. So that means that we don't even have the right numbers. So it's we don't really know who, because how many people have a tickle in their throat? How many people have no symptoms? How many children are infected that don't have symptoms? How many people are like Matt Damon's character in this film that exhibit no symptoms whatsoever? They're immune, they're fine, so they can just kind of go about and live their lives relatively normally. So we just don't know. We don't know who has what. We don't know what symptoms are exhibited. We don't really know what the source is. Is it really like, for like example, like this particular coronavirus, COVID-19, does it actually trace back to the wet markets and whatnot in China, or is it something else that has existed elsewhere that's kind of traveled the globe a little bit beforehand, but we just didn't have it diagnosed before? We just don't know. So we get little bits of information from authorities. And then, of course, we have incompetent leaders and things like that all around the globe that are contradicting each other. Some countries are doing one thing. Some countries are doing something completely different. So it's like we don't know what the fuck is going on. And you have the media that is freaking out, and then markets that are freaking out, and then people are freaking out and buying all the toilet paper and shit like that. So, Helen, like, what do we do? Like, how do we know anything? Like, how do we know the science is real? How do we know what's real about the science? How do we know the numbers are real? And is this film, like, kind of accurate in showing that we're kind of always, that there's like some ambivalence? There are these people behind the scenes, they're trying their fucking best, but even they're kind of like struggling, and they're doing the best they can. I mean, is that kind of how this shit works? I don't know. Again,
man,
I don't know. Uncertain.
Yeah. No, exactly. Well, man, I was pre-med and never got to medical school, so I am far from qualified to even muse on this, really. But the thing about viruses, from my understanding of them, and I kind of read about them as a hobby a little bit, is that they evolved alongside us. And they evolved to, be able to outsmart our immune systems so that they can dodge it and lay dormant. And this kind of seems like it's a commonality among viruses. I'm sure somebody can correct me and bring up examples where that isn't the case. But I think we don't really, they're tricky. And that's why that's part of the reason that we don't know a lot about the way that they kind of work and the way they affect the immune systems, because it seems to work differently in different people, with the exception of knowing who is more susceptible to certain things because they have underlying conditions that affect their immune system so that they can't, they can't fight off various things. But yeah, especially with something like this where my understanding of this is that it's a novel virus, right? So it's something that the immune system, nobody is immune to this thing. So it is going to infect you if it does, if you do contract it. And that doesn't mean that you'll get sick or show symptoms. But what we don't know, at least to my understanding, is how contagious people are. Or maybe we do. And that's something that I meant to look up before we got on this podcast today. But yeah, they're kind of enigmas a little bit. And so we do the best we can to, with the brilliant people who work on this kind of thing. But yeah, it's the nature of the beast itself that makes it such a challenge. So, and then of course, you have kind of, all of the other forces at play, like you said, incompetent governments and, a business a media business that really, in order to survive, needs for people to, click and read and that kind of thing. And so that results in things spreading, misinformation spreading if it's not even on the intention of the writer or the news source initially to spread that misinformation. It's kind of duality of wanting to help people become informed and also needing those clicks to drive revenue, right? So there's a lot going on that makes it again, already kind of a mystery. And then on top of that, you've got that extra layer of all of these forces driving misinformation forward. And then also people who want to profit off of said misinformation. Right. And
exactly.
That part is a business too. So.
I really liked the Jude Law character, actually, because I have, over the past 4 days since I have just been in lockdown, I have been reading and watching crazy conspiracy theories about how this is like a bioweapon and all this shit. And I got friends who are really into this who are sending me these 3-hour long. Why is it that conspiracy theorists can't make a 15-minute video? Why do they always have to be 3 hours long?
Because they're so passionate.
I'll entertain it, but I don't have 9 hours to watch your 3 videos that you've released over the last 4 days or something like that. Come on, homie, just condense it for me, please. But I thought that was really interesting, that angle in this film, because that is something that is at least in certain spheres of the internet, kind of prevalent with the current kind of COVID-19 crisis that we're dealing with, right? That there are people that are saying that this is a bioweapon, that this was something that was designed in a lab, and that there are cures, and people are hiding it because they just want to, make money with their buddies in the pharmaceutical industry in the back room to wait for the right cure so that they can make massive profits, which is exactly what Jude Law's character is basically accusing Lawrence Fishburne's character of, right? When he's in that TV interview with them.
Yeah.
So I thought that was really interesting because I guess that this is just one of those constant themes that there are people out there, and this isn't to absolve governments either of tinkering with biowarfare. They absolutely have 100%. It is a fact they have done that. The problem is because of that uncertainty. When we are uncertain and we don't know, and we have either misinformation or cross information, you have voices that come in that will tell you this is what it is, right? And so Jude Law becomes that voice for the 12 million people or whatever, and he acts like he's a fucking messiah figure or whatever, handing out his flyers. And maybe it's just because he was just trying to make money, and he makes a few $1 million by selling his little, what's it called? Whatever.
Forsythia.
Forsythia. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that's like maybe the brain pills that you get sold by Alex Jones or whatever it is. That's like, some nootropic that is supposed to enhance your brain. Which I've taken nootropics in the past, and they've been great, I guess. Were they placebos? I have no fucking clue, but I enjoyed them as well. But because of that uncertainty of people that can come in and fill those gaps. And I thought that storyline for me was really intriguing. And that I think is partly why the film ultimately was a little bit unsuccessful, is because I didn't get enough of that. I didn't get like it was great for me to entertain it and fill in a lot of the gaps of what that narrative or what that plot line might be. But I didn't get enough to really sink my teeth into the Jude Law, the stakes of his character, the stakes of what he was doing, like him being up against the government. All of a sudden, it's just like the guy's wearing a wire and he's arrested. And I'm like, cool. So you met this dude on a park bench twice and then now you're arrested. I'm like, yeah, I didn't understand. I didn't really understand that he was really that much of a threat. I didn't really understand that this Forsythia thing was really potentially harming people and by giving them a false sense of hope. I kind of did, but not as much as I would have liked to be able to explore that. And I think that was kind of the weak point of the film, because I didn't get to sink my teeth into any of these characters and these really interesting ideas about the uncertainty or the doctor who contracts it and then dies. It was bold to kill Gwyneth Paltrow and fucking Kate Winslet. That's a bold move, man.
Yeah.
Within 5 minutes, Gwyneth Paltrow is dead. And then you're like, oh, okay, because Kate Winslet's going to be the lead. And then 10 minutes later, she's dead. And you're like, what the fuck is going on, Soderbergh? Bold. But yeah. I didn't really get to, I wish we could have just been able to kind of, get into the meat of those storylines just a little bit more. You know?
The movie stretched pretty thin about all these storylines. But interestingly, the original poster tagline was "Nothing spreads like fear," almost as if it was going to focus more on the Jude Law subplot and all of the hysteria that he's that he's doing, but it didn't really.
Yeah. I mean, but you do get the fear, I think. At least it's the intimation of the fear, right? Because people start robbing each other and potentially the neighbors get killed by those dudes that Matt Damon watches in the backyard. You see the gun flashes go off. And so they're probably getting jacked. And then you have Fishburne's partner, who she gets attacked by the people who want the drug. So there is a sense where it's when mass scarcity is induced from this type of pandemic, what that's going to lead to in terms of modes of exchange, which are exchange relations when you have shortages, is going to lead to panic because people are afraid, and that's going to lead to social chaos. So you kind of get it, but that's it. It's just you kind of get it. It's more about in your imagination. How do you imagine it? And maybe because we're dealing with this pandemic now, it's more frightening for us. Whereas I think if I would have watched this in 2011 or 12, I would have been yeah, okay, that's frightening. But now I'm kind of holy fuck. So maybe it's more what I'm projecting because of my fears or my anxieties based on the current contemporary moment,
It's funny you mentioned Alex Jones and him selling whatever. Well, apparently there was an article that was interviewing the screenwriter of this film, and the interviewer told the screenwriter that, in fact, apparently Alex Jones is selling a toothpaste that is supposed to cure you of coronavirus.
Indeed, he is.
You heard that too?
He was just ordered to stop doing as much, Yeah, that was it's pretty fascinating. And then there was another one. Maybe we were reading the same article, Jared, but where Soderbergh sends Scott Burns a text telling him about how elderberry sales are going up which is very similar apparently to forsythia, I suppose. So it's like, hey, here's another homeopathic remedy that I don't know who's peddling elderberry, but yeah, that's what is it? What was the quote that Jude Law's character said about somebody's always going to make profit off of these things, whether or not they are no matter where they are kind of in the game, whether they get caught or whatever, there's always somebody who ends up winning, like the sales of various cleaning products and cold remedies went up after the Spanish flu, and somebody's going to make their millions off of catastrophe. And that's the nature of it. Might as well join in. And so it's and that brings me to actually another Scott Burns quote from another article that I just thought was really fascinating. He said this recently, that viruses viruses are tracer bullets through society, and they illuminate a lot of the problems that we have. And this is precisely an example of that, right? Where in the way society is structured, somebody's gonna make a zillion bucks off of peddling elderberry. Like I said, why not be that guy? It's gonna happen. And that's sort of Let me see that here.
There's a famous quote in the field of economics that gets passed around. Excuse me, guys. Sorry for coughing. And it's actually the title of a book by an economist named Philip Murawski as well, but it's "Never Let a Good Crisis Go to Waste." And and in the economics field, it generally means like when you have, for example, the collapse of 2008, where tens of trillions of global wealth is destroyed. Well, what that does is that creates opportunities for consolidation of big corporations, and also for the purchase of cheap assets, so that you have a turn towards like quantitative easing, which then ends up helping financial institutions and tech institutions with stock buybacks and things like that. So this idea again of never letting a good crisis go to waste is something that you can kind of see even in this with this idea with Jude Law, right? Is that he's kind of like, fuck, man, we got this crisis and someone's going to profit. Someone's going to do something. At least I'm giving people some kind of hope. Maybe, we don't really know. It could be a homeopathic cure. Like, I'm doing something, right? Mm-hmm. So it is kind of interesting to think about that there during these times of crisis is when we do see interesting changes and transformations of society, of economics, of politics. Like, it's going to be really curious to see where we end up at the outset on the other end of this whole COVID-19 crisis. Like, states are already rolling out stimulus plans. They're freezing rent, they're freezing electric bills and gas bills, utility bills. Some states are doing helicopter drops where the federal government is just giving people cash. So you have that in Australia, for example. You might get that in the United States. You might have to get that. You have other packages that are being rolled out, cutting payroll tax, giving bigger tax breaks to small businesses, things like that. So the question is where do we end up on the other end of this? Who's benefiting in these times of crisis, right? Like, who has the positions of power so that they're the ones that can consolidate further power, so that they can purchase those assets, so that they can make the money in the medical field, so that they can get themselves positioned so that they can profit on the other end. That's what's going to be really interesting, I think, about this. And that's one of the things that the film kind of, I think, spoke to. It didn't like intentionally, but for me, that's where my mind was. Obviously, I work in a political economy department. I write on finance and speculative critical finance theory. So like, this is where my mind has all been thinking lately. And I'm like, this is really interesting, especially considering what's going on with our own situation. But also look at this, because this film is even more chaotic than anything we're experiencing at the moment, because the disease is obviously deadlier and more widespread. And so I'm like, oh shit, like, is this our future? Like, is this, like, even if it's not this particular disease, are we learning from the effects of this disease so that we can have the pieces in place, the social safety nets in place, so that we can be prepared for something that is as deadly as Ebola or MERS, that then exceeds the scale of even what this particular coronavirus is currently exhibiting? Then it's like, do we have the pieces in place to deal with it then? Like, are we going to learn? Or are we just going to allow some fucking corrupt asshole to get in again and impose some kind of like neo-fascism? It's like, yeah, everyone have like some sort of online digital ID, which is something they're trying to roll out now, right? The ID 2020 shit. Like, is that something that we want? More surveillance? More of our data kind of collated and centralized into bureaucratic institutions? Is that good? Like, what do you do? And that's what's going to be really curious for me to see is how is this crisis not going to be put or let to just be wasteful, right? How are they going to make this crisis not wasteful? That's what's curious.
Yeah, well, in the spirit of this movie, you just spread some fear, at least in my heart.
Yeah, a little bit in mine too, but
no joke, we should be afraid. Not afraid in the sense that we don't go outside, but we should be afraid because we should recognize that people in power, like they are gonna try to position themselves. Like this is just the way human beings are. Like I am somebody who has a lot of optimism about humanity. Like I like to see that people can come together and work in social cooperation, and that when the sick neighbor next door can't leave, that you're like, you call them and you offer, like, I will go buy you groceries. I like to think that that's how human beings can be. But I also know that human beings can also be like the motherfuckers in the masks that have the shotguns that go in and kill the neighbor so that they can rob them of their supplies or their money or whatever it is. I know that human beings can do both. Human beings can achieve great things and awful things. So we should be afraid. But then that means that we need to be vigilant so that we can create the futures that we want to see that can be more beneficial and more cooperative. Because human beings don't have an essential nature. We're malleable and we're plastic. And so we can craft ourselves and we can craft our communities and craft our societies. So yeah, be afraid, but also just be vigilant, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
Anything else you guys want to bring up about the movie before we head into the mailbag?
I think I'm good. I think that's all I had.
Okay, we got some great emails and voicemails about The Lighthouse. Helen, have you seen The Lighthouse?
I have not seen The Lighthouse.
Oh,
so
well,
I was listening.
We might have to spoil some of it for you.
That's okay. Go ahead. I deserve it. Go ahead.
Okay, well, we got a voice...
I'll be honest, it's one of those films that even if you spoil, I still think you can get rocked.
The experience is still not spoiled.
Awesome.
No.
If you want to send us a voicemail, it's 213-534-8807 or 21-ELF-HUT-07. We got one from Jason.
Hey, this is Jason. I'm calling in about the Lighthouse podcast that I just listened to. I wanted to address 2 points. The first was a question that Jared brought up in the episode about the aspect ratio and specifically why it was 1:19:1. So I was listening to an interview with Robert Eggers, and he said that the reason he chose this wasn't specifically to be kind of avant-garde or retro or anything like that. It was that he wanted an aspect ratio that could frame the entire lighthouse in the background while having the characters and a relatively close shot without it being too wide. So I think there was probably a practical reason that also then benefited the stylistic reason as well. My second point was I wanted to talk about sexuality in the lighthouse. You guys touched on this briefly. More specifically, the fact that Robert Pattinson's character is homosexual. Without getting too Reddity, I just thought it was interesting that perhaps the reason he was sent there was because he was a gay man and that there were very few professions that would tolerate that at the time. And then obviously this is, actually supported by the fact that he and Willem Dafoe nearly kiss. And the moment where he looks into the light could be him fully coming to terms with the fact that he is gay. And then there's also all kinds of phallic imagery, including the lighthouse itself and other, I think there's like a clock and some other items in the house which are distinctly phallic. So that was just something interesting that I wouldn't be surprised if Eggers layered in there just to make it even more theory generating.
All right, I'm going to cut Jason off there. Thank you so much for that voicemail, Jason. You know, somebody sent us an email that there's that one striking image in the movie where Robert Pattinson sees his doppelganger and then he turns around and he sees Willem Dafoe naked and he opens his mouth and there's that beam of light. Somebody sent us an email with a link to the painting that inspired that image. And apparently that painting was also about homosexuality. So I found that to be really interesting. I don't have the painting in front of me, unfortunately.
Interesting. I mean, I think the theme of repressed homosexual desire is replete in that film. And it's really interesting. And Jason just kind of made that point about staring into the light. I think that's a really interesting idea, right? Because in that time period in particular, it was something that was not tolerated or acceptable at all. I mean, it's still struggling to this day. And at that time, it was even worse, right? So, yeah, that's really interesting. Staring into the light is kind of like the real of actually confronting the truth. And what happens? He can't bear, and he falls down the stairs, and he gets fucked up, and he ends up dying, right? Because you can't actually be who you are, sort of thing. Interesting.
This is the painting, if you guys can see it.
Oh, I can't see it.
Oh, sorry.
That looks really dope from back here.
Yeah, it looks really dope. The emailer did not. It's from Logan. He did not give me the name of the painting, but it looks pretty awesome.
Okay.
All right, we got one more from our boy Jacob, who calls in sometimes. Let's hear it.
Show me the meaning, Wisecrack crew. Jacob calling again in regards to your Lighthouse podcast. I really enjoyed the movie. William Dafoe and Robert Pattinson were at their very best, and it got me thinking about H.P. Lovecraft for some reason. And I don't know if you guys read any H.P. Lovecraft, but it reminded me of his book Dagon, which is about a man who is stranded at sea. And I just want to know if you really think that about it. It's like, is it really an H.P. Lovecraft movie? Is it a modern day Prometheus? I know you guys were talking about the modern day Prometheus parallels between Zeus as William Dafoe and Robert Pattinson as the iconic character Prometheus, who, in an ironic sense of way of destiny, winds up having his liver pecked out because he winds up stealing fire from the gods and giving them animal fat. So, I want to know what you guys thought about the H.P. Lovecraft parallel, and I love what you guys doing. Welcome back, Jared and Austin.
Cool. Bye. Thank you, Jacob. Yeah, I mean, just in the fact that we see these monstrous tentacles and stuff like that, definitely the H.P. Lovecraft reference did come to mind, but I didn't really have. I've only read At the Mountains of Madness, so I'm not that well read at H.P. Lovecraft. Have any of you guys read that text?
No, but I'm going to have to now. It sounds fascinating.
Yeah, Helen, have you ever read any H.P. Lovecraft?
No, I don't think I have, which surprises me.
I feel like you'd dig it.
Yeah, I'm gonna binge some H.P. Lovecraft now, actually, and watch this film, which sounds really, really good.
It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the big themes in Lovecraft, right, is I guess you could call it cosmic horror.
Yeah,
what a lot of writers refer to it as. Mm-hmm. And it's almost like instead of, so if it's like the complete opposite, let's say, of Contagion, which is not cosmic horror. It's like Contagion is what, scientific horror, I guess, or the
domestic horror,
like the monster.
Yeah. Right.
But with Lovecraft, it's almost this. It's something more than. We could say supernatural. You could say excessive. You could say the beyond, the cosmic, the universal, the galactic, the alien, something along those lines. I can totally see that this is kind of a Lovecraftian script, and I didn't put that together. So I think that's really interesting. It makes me kind of want to reframe the film in some ways. I wonder if Eggers has talked about this at all, actually.
Interesting. All right, we're going to move into the emails. I'm going to read 2 emails. Hit us up at movies@wisecrack.co. This one is from Anastasia. This one's pretty cool. She said, just wanted to take time and email about the last podcast I listened to about the Lighthouse. So I'm from a small town in Nova Scotia, Canada, where the Lighthouse was filmed. And I can't help but feel that it was filmed here and our local culture slipped into it. Ocean lore is so embedded in our maritime region culture that I just wanted to give you guys my take on the whole mermaid discussion and maybe add some more insight onto the other themes I think they tried to touch on in the film. Mermaids here represent want or lust or the constant chase of desires. Mermaids/sirens are elusive and come to sailors at times of desperation or deprivation, basically preying on their sanity. I believe that's why they were included in the film. My boyfriend is a sailor, and all too often I hear him speak of how being on and near the rolling ocean can make you daydream/hallucinate. When you're in complete isolation at the mercy of the ocean for months and months, it's taxing mentally. Many men will lose track of time. Sometimes they have to stop men from throwing themselves overboard, not to get too dark. The ocean here is cold, almost unswimmable most of the year, and we have a very well-known lighthouse where many tourists die annually getting pulled in off the rocks by ice-cold waves. I see the film The Lighthouse using the same local themes in the movie, and I know it resonated strongly with many Maritimers. Anyway, I hope this sheds some light on my take. I think it's a great email. I think that this is like the most locally specific, valid reading I've ever heard.
Yeah. Do either of you have like a romanticism about the ocean and maritime themes and lore? Like, I feel like in another life, I could easily, well, in many lives, I could be 1, a sailor, 2, I could be a pirate, 3, I could be some sort of maritime historian, something. I love the idea of these myths and these tales and like what happens when you're out just, human in ocean, or whatever. I love this stuff.
Yeah, I live a block away from Ocean Beach over here in San Francisco, and I'm there twice a day because of that vastness of the depth and this whole I love the way you put it, Austin, to the idea of being human in the ocean, and it's far, far more powerful, and that is why, the lore runs so deep because it's so mysterious, it's absolutely romantic. Yeah, it's wonderful. That was a great email.
All right, I'm going to read one more from Aaron, and then we got to run. So Aaron says, I believe that Young is stuck in purgatory awaiting his eternal damnation for killing and assuming the identity of his coworker. Before he can experience eternal damnation, he needs to reconcile with what he did and admit it, a.k.a. spill his beans. He tries to force his way up to heaven, i.e. the light, and gets rejected. I did not read his reaction as pleasure, but horror and pain, and he gets knocked all the way down to eternal punishment. I also like this reading as well.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, super interesting.
Yeah. I think that's really good. Yeah, I think that's the idea, though, right? Like not to continually keep going back to, but I'm going to continually keep going back to psychoanalysis. But the idea is that the real is terrifying. The real is too much. If you ever got the satisfaction of your desires, you would cease to be, right? Because then you would have nothing to live for anymore. The point is that desires are the things that induce action, that compel us or that impel us forward. If you got the full satisfaction of your desire, if you ever came face to face with the thing you really wanted, then you wouldn't want anything anymore, and it would destroy you. It would be too much, right? So I think that's absolutely right, is that maybe he is in purgatory because he's trying to, he has to kind of reconcile himself to whatever the sins were that he came in contact with. But you can't actually find true perfect redemption. You're gonna fall. It's a very pessimistic take on the human experience, but it is kind of like we are condemned to hell sort of a kind of take on things.
Yeah. All right, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. Again, if you want to send us a voicemail, it's 213-534-8807 or 21-ELF-HUT-07. And if you want to send us an email, it's movies@wisecrack.co. But before we leave, Helen and Austin, where can we find you guys on social media? Let's start with Helen.
I am reluctantly on Instagram. You can find me at FLOERSH.
All right, and Austin.
Yeah, you can hit me up on Insta, Austin_Hayden. I'm sorry, on Twitter, Austin_Hayden. I am on Insta. It's AUS_HAY. And then I do a philosophy podcast. I haven't been as on top of it the last 2 weeks just because things have been manic. But it normally weekly episodes, philosophy, politics, all kinds of shit like that. So it's called Owls at Dawn.
Okay, cool. All right, well, we'll see you guys in 2 weeks. Until then, thanks for listening, guys, and peace.
What?